ceremony. Former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee and former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum. Gentlemen, good to see you. Governor, I want to start with you. There were reports that the officer engaged the shooter. That was what we first had heard. Those reports have now been walked back, and we know that there was no officer outside the school and that the shooter faced zero resistance as he entered the school. There's video that's come out showing him, like, walking right in. So the question is, how much does that play into undermining the argument that this, that everything was in place that could have prevented this?
Clearly, it wasn't all in place, but we don't know the full scope of the facts, and we won't for a while. That phrase, fog of war, certainly comes into play here. There's a certain perception of what happened that tends to be wrong as people start unwinding and unpacking the moment-by-moment details. I experienced that as a governor when the Jonesboro school shooting happened in 1998. And there were so many reports and stories, and so much of it turned out to be wrong, but people see it as they see it at the moment. But it's filtered through their pain, through their emotion, through their excitement and their fear. We'll find out, but clearly there was not a resource officer. And I think the big question is it time for us to think about the importance of having an armed resource officer on every campus? We go through so much to get on an airplane or go to a concert. And I think that's the one thing that I'm hearing that seems to have a strong, universal, even bipartisan sense of support, is that it's perhaps time for that.
Senator, kind of going off what the governor was saying, I see all of these former colleagues of yours in the United States Senate and in the House of Representatives, and they're talking about, we need to pass this, we need to do this. One of the questions I keep thinking to myself is, okay, is anything that you're saying, would it have stopped this gunman or the ones that have done things in the past? And I think to what the governor said, they're talking about what we should be doing without knowing what happened first and foremost. So as somebody that was in that body before, how much of that goes into the thinking of responding and proposing in terms of saying this legislation would do this? Because every time that I hear these folks talk about a new law that should be passed, the first thing that goes through my head is, would that have stopped it? Because every time I've heard Biden, he said, well, that might not have stopped it, but we should do it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, what legislators do is they just react saying, well, we have to do something. So generally speaking, they just go to their old bag of tricks and pull out what they wanted to do for a long time, and they propose that. That's what you see the left doing right now. And so what I'm hoping for is that we take a step back, as the governor said, and excuse me, and we create a time for us to actually look at what happened, see if there is anything we can do. But more importantly, Mike, is we have to look at how are we getting to the point where this is more commonplace. We have high rates of suicides with guns. We have record rates of depression, record rates of drug abuse. Young men are lost in our society. And I sort of see the left and what they're doing right now, Beto O'Rourke, a good example, is deflecting. They're deflecting away from the society they've created, from a culture they've created, that they've destroyed traditional values. They destroyed the nuclear family. And now they're coming back and saying, no, don't look at that. Don't look at the culture. Don't look at our moral codes. Don't look at anything else. Just look at guns. And by the way, the rate of gun ownership in this country is less now than it was 100 years ago, and we weren't having this problem. So
I want to touch on
the deflection and focus on the problem.
And I want to get to culture in a minute, but what I want to do first is go through some of the proposals that a lot of folks on the left are talking about and see if they make any sense. So I want to start with this idea of red flag laws, right? The red flag laws are gun control laws that allow the police or family members to petition a court to order the temporary removal of a firearm from a person who they believe may play a danger to themselves or others. So, Governor, would something like this, does it have merit?
I think it has merit, Sean, but the challenge of it is who gets to make that decision. Do you have, let's say, a family member who just has an argument with a gun-owning family member and says, I think this guy's dangerous. Is that all it takes? Maybe that's all it needs to take. But now you're getting into the issue of what rights does the accused have. The fundamental aspect of U.S. jurisprudence is that you're innocent until you are proven guilty. This kind of gets right on the edge of saying you're guilty because somebody just made an allegation, and you have the consequences of guilt even before you're proven. I know that's a sticky wicket, but freedom is also a sticky wicket. There is no perfect solution here. And I just want us to be careful when we say, and I loved what Senator Santorum said, legislators will get up and beat their chest and say, we got to do something. But the something we do ought to be helpful. I think we ought to all take the political Hippocratic oath first, do no harm.
So I get your point, but Senator, let's take what the governor said and walk it a step further. Let's say that it can't just be somebody or a police officer. You have to go to a judge, and a judge would have to issue that decree to say that this person temporarily has their weapon removed because they present a threat to themselves or others. Would you be, if you were still in the Senate, would you be okay with that?
You know, here's where I think that, again, they're deflecting. They're focused on the gun and not the underlying problem, which is we're raising boys who are just completely disassociated with there's most young men in America are being raised without a father in the home. Most are more connected to the pornography and violent video games than they are to a member of their family. I mean, this is the fundamental problem. And we're saying, oh, well, we got to pass some law dealing with guns. No, we need to look at what we can do to help restore the nuclear family. We have to look at mental health. I mean, there is one area that, outside of the family moral issues I'm talking about. I mean, we have dramatically changed mental health in this country and how we deal with people with mental illness. And, they're on street corners and not in institutions. And we deinstitutionalized. I know that was a very important and big thing. But there are people who, cannot and should not be just wandering the streets. And a lot of them are young people who are, again, not connected to reality and because of the culture that they live in. We need to have a more aggressive policy, not having to do strictly with guns, although that may be part of the discussion, but a broader discussion of mental health and how we deal with people who are obviously sick.
So, Governor, one of the other big things is expanded background checks. And I know a lot of folks in Arkansas grow up in a culture of guns. They go hunting, they go shooting. So this issue is obviously would be really affect a lot of folks in Arkansas. But the thing is, in this case, the shooter did not, he did possess a gun legally. He went through the background check and there was nothing in it. So the question is, what in this proposal would make sense in terms of expanded background checks, if anything?
I think that's the big unknown. I'm open-minded to anything that might prevent what happened in Uvalde. I really am. I mean, I grieve for those people, the community, the parents, the families, the other kids. If there's something someone can come and say, this would really help. But even the background checks, we need to ask ourselves, who conducts them? What exactly are we looking for? And if we find that there's a question, then what? Does the person permanently and forever get denied Second Amendment rights? Those are tough questions, and they have to be answered. I do believe that the senator is on the right track when he says that this is a bigger issue of culture, of the emptiness of young men. We have spent a generation trying to tell young men that it's nothing to be a man, that being a man doesn't mean anything. Now, contrast that when I was in school in Arkansas, you mentioned that, and it's a long time ago, I get it. But Sean, every pickup truck in the high school parking lot, almost every one of them, had a rifle in the window of the back of the truck. And it was because we went deer hunting before school and or after school. No one ever imagined taking that rifle out of our trucks, going in and shooting up the school or a teacher or another student. So we had more guns than you'll ever see on a campus today, but we didn't have shooting because we understood that what it was to be a man was that you protected your fellow citizens. You didn't try to kill them.
Right. Senator, I want to pick up on what you were talking about with respect to mental health. I'm going to get to culture, I promise you. So there's a difference between what we need to fix in the future and what we have to deal with now. There are people who have a mental illness for a variety of reasons that you kind of enumerated. The question is, what do we do about people who have a mental illness now, right? How do we use that as a discriminator against people because they do have an illness? We don't want them to possess a gun. How do we get to that issue? Because I get what you're saying. You're talking about fixing culture. Fair enough. That doesn't happen tomorrow. There's a lot of things that need to change. But the here and now for people who have a mental illness or suspect to have one, how do we address that to make sure that those people aren't a threat?
Okay, so the first thing I would say before you even address that, you address just like when 9/11 happened, the first thing you do, you harden the target that the attackers took. So the first step you can do easily is harden the target. Single point of entry for school. Schools are locked. You can't get in. I mean, you have as Mike said, a resource officer, someone there, and there are things you can do to make sure that a school is a safer place, and that's number one. Number two. Yes, I mean, look, you need to look at red flag laws. You need to look at all of those things. And, each state is going to do it differently, as it should be. New York already has a red flag law. Didn't help in the case of Buffalo. I mean, the reality is there are all sorts of things that you can look at. We need to discuss these things. I don't think I can't off the top of my head tell you what the perfect solution is, but it is, taking more people off the streets and into mental health facilities and care, which means we're going to have to expand mental health facilities. I mean, this is a longer process than just we're going to pass a bill. You can pass all sorts of laws. It's a very complicated and hard thing to deal with the mental health issue. The easiest thing to deal with, the quickest thing to deal with, is to harden the target of our school.